For 15 years, Steve Harvey had mastered the art of handling unexpected moments on Family Feud with his trademark humor and quick wit. But on a seemingly routine Tuesday taping in October 2024, something happened that left the veteran host utterly speechless. When 58-year-old Thomas Williams, introduced simply as a community volunteer from Chicago, stepped up to the Fast Money podium, no one could have anticipated what would unfold. His answer to a seemingly innocent question didn't just surprise the audience, it stopped the entire production cold. For the first time in the show's long history, Steve Harvey removed his earpiece, set down his question cards, and refused to continue until he could speak privately with a contestant. What began as light entertainment suddenly transformed into a profound moment of recognition that would change multiple lives forever and remind millions of viewers that sometimes our most significant connections come when we least expect them. Thomas Williams stood at the Family Feud podium with a quiet dignity that seemed at odds with his worn but meticulously clean button-down shirt and slightly too large dress pants. At 58, his salt and pepper hair was closely cropped, his face weathered by years of outdoor exposure, yet his eyes held a sharp intelligence and unwavering focus. Unlike many contestants who bounced with nervous energy, Thomas remained perfectly still, his hands resting lightly on the podium, his posture straight but not rigid. The Williams family had been selected for the show after Thomas's daughter, Aisha, a social worker at Chicago's largest homeless outreach program, submitted their application. The family included Thomas, Aisha, her husband Marcus, who worked as a high school teacher, Thomas's son James, who drove for a rideshare service, and his nephew Deshaun, who was completing a degree in engineering. Their episode had a special focus on community service, with each family describing their volunteer work during introductions. What the producers, audience, and even most of his own family didn't know was that Thomas's volunteer work at Lakeside Community Shelter was far more personal than he had let on. For the past 3 years, Thomas Williams had been a resident there, working his way from emergency housing to a transitional program while saving meticulously for permanent housing. His family had described him as staying with friends during a difficult period, a partial truth that preserved his dignity while concealing his circumstances. Only Aisha knew the full extent of her father's situation. She had helped him secure a place at Lakeside after a perfect storm of setbacks, a layoff from his 20-year factory job, a serious illness that depleted his savings, and finally, eviction from his apartment. Despite these hardships, Thomas had refused to burden his children, insisting they focus on their own families while he sorted things out temporarily. At Lakeside, Thomas had quickly distinguished himself by helping organize donation systems, mentoring younger residents, and eventually taking on responsibilities that blurred the line between client and staff. His background in factory management proved invaluable in bringing structure to the shelter's operations. The shelter director had written a glowing recommendation for the Family Feud application, describing Thomas as the backbone of our community without revealing his resident status. As Thomas prepared for Fast Money, having already helped his family secure 175 points in the main game, Steve Harvey approached with his usual pre-round banter. "So Thomas, I understand you do a lot of work with the homeless community in Chicago?" Thomas nodded, his expression revealing nothing of his internal tension. "Yes, at Lakeside Shelter, I help organize their donation system, meal services, and mentorship programs." "That's wonderful work," Steve replied. "What got you started with that?" For a brief moment, Thomas's carefully maintained composure wavered. "Life has a way of showing you what really matters," he said finally. "I learned that everyone is just 1 or 2 bad breaks away from needing help." Steve nodded appreciatively, unaware of the deeper truth behind Thomas's words. "Well said. Now, you ready to win some money for your family?" More ready than you know, Thomas answered, his eyes reflecting a determination born from years of fighting to regain stability. The clock was set, the questions prepared, and no one in the studio could have predicted how the next 2 minutes would completely transform what had begun as an ordinary episode of family entertainment. With Aisha having already scored an impressive 175 points, Thomas needed just 25 points to secure the $20,000 prize for his family. As Steve set the timer for 20 seconds, Thomas took a deep, centering breath. For him, this wasn't just a game. It was perhaps his best chance to finally move out of transitional housing and into a place of his own again. Name something people often borrow but rarely return, Steve began. Money, Thomas answered without hesitation. Name a place where people shouldn't talk loudly. Library. Name something specific that might make a house feel like a home. Thomas's voice softened slightly. Family pictures. Name something people do when they can't sleep. Read. Name something you would hate to find in your bed. Bedbugs, Thomas finished just as the buzzer sounded. The audience applauded, and Steve prepared to reveal the scores. Thomas had responded with remarkable speed and clarity, his answers practical and thoughtful. Exactly what you'd expect from someone who had spent a lifetime solving problems with limited resources. All right, Thomas, you said money for something people borrow but rarely return. Survey says. The board revealed 42 points. An excellent start. Library for a place where people shouldn't talk loudly. 38 points appeared on the board, bringing his total to 80. For something that makes a house feel like home, you said family pictures. Survey says 35 points. Thomas now had 115 points. Combined with Aisha's 175, the family had secured 290 points, well over the 200 needed to win. The audience began to cheer, recognizing they'd already won, but Steve continued with the final answers. For something people do when they can't sleep, you said read. Survey says 27 points, pushing their total even higher. And finally, something you would hate to find in your bed, you said bedbugs. Survey says. The board revealed 41 points, completing Thomas's near-perfect round with a personal score of 183 points. Combined with Aisha's 175, the Williams family had achieved a remarkable 358 points, one of the highest scores in the show's history. The family erupted in celebration, embracing each other as Steve announced their $20,000 prize. But as the initial excitement began to settle, Steve approached Thomas with a follow-up question, a standard part of the show where the host would ask contestants about their plans for the prize money. So, Thomas, $20,000 is a nice chunk of change. What do you think the family will do with it? Thomas hesitated, glancing briefly at Aisha, who gave him an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. Well, Steve, if the family agrees, I'd like to use my portion as a security deposit and first year's rent on an apartment. I've been staying at Lakeside Shelter for almost 3 years now, and it's time I had my own place again. The studio fell completely silent. Steve Harvey's expression froze, his usual quick response failing him as he processed Thomas's words. For several seconds, no one moved or spoke, an eternity in television time. Then, something unprecedented happened. Steve removed his earpiece, set down his question cards, and turned to the producers off camera. "We need to pause for a moment," he said firmly, his tone making it clear this wasn't a suggestion. The red recording lights remained on, but Steve ignored them, turning back to Thomas. "Did I understand correctly? You've been staying at the shelter where you volunteer?" Thomas stood straight, his dignity intact despite the revelation. "Yes, I lost my job of 20 years when the factory closed. Then I got sick, pneumonia that turned into sepsis. 3 weeks in the hospital wiped out my savings. By the time I recovered, I couldn't make rent. Lakeside took me in, gave me a purpose again when I was at my lowest. Steve looked at Thomas with new understanding, then glanced at the family. Did you all know? I knew, Aisha said quietly. The others thought Dad was staying with friends temporarily. He asked me not to tell them how bad things got. He didn't want them to worry. James and Deshawn looked shocked, then deeply pained as they realized they had been unaware of Thomas's true circumstances. Marcus, Aisha's husband, placed a supportive hand on his father-in-law's shoulder. Steve turned back to the producers. I said we need to pause, he repeated, more firmly this time. When a producer began to approach with evident concern about the schedule, Steve shook his head decisively. I'm not continuing until I've had a chance to speak with Mr. Williams privately. This isn't about television anymore. The studio audience sat in stunned silence as Steve Harvey did something no one had ever seen before in his long hosting career. He removed his suit jacket and placed it carefully on his podium, a symbolic shedding of his entertainer persona. Then, ignoring the frantic signals from producers, he guided Thomas away from the set to a quiet corner of the stage. The cameras continued to roll, capturing this unscripted moment from a respectful distance. Though microphones couldn't pick up their conversation, viewers could see Steve place both hands on Thomas's shoulders, speaking intently. Thomas nodded several times, occasionally wiping at his eyes, his usual stoic composure finally breaking under this unexpected compassion. After several minutes, the two men embraced, and Steve called over a production assistant. He gave specific instructions, and the assistant hurried off while Steve returned to the set with Thomas. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve addressed the audience directly, his voice carrying the weight of genuine emotion rather than performance. We're going to do something different today. He turned to face the cameras squarely. Family Feud is a game about families supporting each other through good times and bad. Today, we've been privileged to meet a family that exemplifies this in ways that go far beyond a television show. Steve placed his hand on Thomas's shoulder. Mr. Thomas Williams has shown extraordinary dignity, working to support others at Lakeside Shelter, even while facing his own housing challenges. Today, I'm not just your host. I'm a human being who recognizes another human being's courage and integrity. The studio remained utterly silent as Steve continued. The Williams family has won $20,000 fair and square, but that's not going to be enough to truly change Mr. Williams's situation in Chicago's housing market. Steve turned to the producers off-camera again. With the support of our production company and my own personal commitment, we're increasing the Williams family's prize to $100,000. The audience erupted in applause and cheers. Thomas stood in shock, his carefully maintained composure completely dissolved as tears streamed down his face. His family surrounded him in a tight embrace. All previous barriers of secrecy and pride washed away in this moment of transformation. But Steve wasn't finished. And one more thing. I've just arranged for a representative from the Chicago Housing Initiative to meet with Mr. Williams immediately after our taping. They're going to help secure appropriate housing without delays or wait lists. He faced Thomas directly now. No more shelter beds, sir. You're going home, to a real home of your own. Thomas, overwhelmed, could only nod and extend his hand to Steve. But Steve bypassed the handshake and embraced him fully, man to man, with no thought to cameras or production schedules. When he finally stepped back, Steve addressed the audience again. I've been hosting this show for 15 years, and I've learned that sometimes the most valuable moments happen when we go off script and recognize our shared humanity. What we've witnessed today isn't about entertainment. It's about seeing each other, truly seeing each other, beyond the roles we play and the circumstances we find ourselves in. The producers, recognizing the powerful, authentic moment unfolding, had wisely allowed the cameras to continue rolling. What had begun as a potential crisis for a tightly scheduled television production had transformed into something far more meaningful. As the Williams family gathered together at center stage, Steve turned to Thomas once more. "Mr. Williams, I understand you've been helping organize donation systems at Lakeside Shelter?" Thomas nodded, finding his voice again. "Yes. I've implemented inventory tracking that increased efficiency by about 40%. More donations are getting to the right people faster." Steve smiled with newfound respect. "That sounds like professional-level management to me." "Before the factory closed, I was a logistics supervisor for 20 years, Thomas explained. "At Lakeside, I just applied those same principles." "Well," Steve said thoughtfully, "I happen to know some people who could use those skills in a paid position." He gestured to another production assistant, who hurried forward with a business card. "This is the contact information for the Harvey Foundation's Chicago office. They're looking for a community resources coordinator right now. I'd like you to call them tomorrow. The position includes full benefits and housing assistance." The audience, already emotional from the previous revelations, rose to their feet in a standing ovation. The Williams family stood in a tight circle, their earlier celebratory joy transformed into something deeper and more profound. When the applause finally quieted, Steve addressed the viewers at home. "Folks, we came here today to play a game show. But sometimes life reminds us that what happens between the games, how we recognize and honor each other's humanity, that's what really matters." He turned to the Williams family one last time. "Thank you for your courage, your dignity, and for reminding all of us that family isn't just about who we're related to. It's about supporting each other through life's challenges." What had begun as a standard episode of Family Feud had transformed into a powerful testimony to resilience, dignity, and the unexpected ways that truth can lead to transformation. The episode featuring Thomas Williams and his family aired 3 months later, carefully edited with the full cooperation and approval of everyone involved. The producers had initially considered cutting the unscripted moments, concerned about deviating from the show's light entertainment format. But after viewing the raw footage, they recognized they had captured something extraordinary, a genuine human connection that transcended the game show framework. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. The episode became the most watched in Family Feud history, with clips of Steve Harvey's impromptu intervention going viral across social media platforms. Dignity Matters and Chanchoy's Thomas Williams became trending topics as viewers shared their own stories of hidden hardships and unexpected kindness. For Thomas Williams, the transformation was profound but characteristically understated. True to his word, Steve Harvey had ensured the Chicago Housing Initiative fast-tracked Thomas's application for permanent housing. Within weeks of the taping, Thomas moved into a modest one-bedroom apartment in a stable neighborhood close to his family, his first real home in over 3 years. The position at the Harvey Foundation proved to be an ideal fit for Thomas's skills and experience. As Community Resources Coordinator, he applied the same systems thinking approach that had served him well at the factory and at Lakeside Shelter, now with the resources and authority to implement larger-scale improvements. Within 6 months, he had restructured the Foundation's donation distribution network, increasing their reach by over 60% while reducing operational costs. But perhaps more significant than his professional success was Thomas's emergence as an advocate for what he called the dignified homeless, individuals who maintained their pride and sense of purpose despite losing material security. He began speaking at community events, then at regional conferences, sharing both his personal experience and his vision for more effective support systems. "Homelessness isn't a character flaw, it's a circumstance," became his signature message. The same skills, intelligence, and dignity that served me throughout my career remained with me at Lakeside Shelter. The only thing I lost was an address. Lakeside Shelter itself underwent significant changes following the episode's airing. Donations poured in, allowing for much-needed facility improvements. But more importantly, Thomas's story had changed how people viewed the shelter's residents. Community members began volunteering not just to serve meals, but to offer professional mentorship, job interview preparation, and social connection. 6 months after the episode aired, Steve Harvey visited Lakeside Shelter with a full camera crew, not for Family Feud, but for a special documentary titled Beyond the Game, Dignity, Community, and Second Chances. The documentary featured Thomas's journey alongside those of other shelter residents, highlighting the thin line between stability and crisis that many Americans navigate. During production, Steve and Thomas reunited on camera for the first time since the taping. Their conversation, unscripted and genuine, became the emotional centerpiece of the documentary. "When you revealed your situation that day on set, something just clicked for me," Steve explained. "I've built my career on entertainment, but in that moment, I realized some things transcend the show. Some moments call for us to be human first, entertainers second." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "For 3 years, I'd been carefully hiding my situation, afraid of being judged or pitied. But when I finally spoke my truth, it didn't diminish me. It opened doors I couldn't have imagined." "That's the power of authentic connection," Steve replied. "When we drop the masks we wear, we create space for real transformation." The documentary went on to win several awards and sparked a national conversation about housing insecurity, dignity in difficult circumstances, and the responsibility of media to illuminate rather than exploit human struggles. The Harvey Foundation expanded its housing initiative program nationwide, providing both immediate assistance and long-term stability support for families in crisis. For the Williams family, the experience catalyzed a deeper healing and connection. James and Deshawn, initially devastated by their unawareness of Thomas's circumstances, channeled their regret into active support. James used his portion of the prize money to purchase a reliable car, which he used not only for his rideshare work, but also to establish a free transportation service for Lakeside residents attending job interviews or medical appointments. Deshawn, upon completing his engineering degree, developed a user-friendly app connecting shelter residents with appropriate resources and opportunities based on their specific skills and needs. The most profound transformation, however, was perhaps the least visible. Within the Williams family, the walls of pride and secrecy that had prevented Thomas from sharing his struggles gradually dissolved. Weekly family dinners became a sacred tradition, held in Thomas's new apartment where his grandchildren now visited regularly. These gatherings became a space where genuine challenges could be voiced without fear of judgment, where vulnerability was recognized as strength rather than weakness. On the 1-year anniversary of the fateful episode, Family Feud aired a special update segment featuring Thomas and his family. Thomas, now settled in his role at the Harvey Foundation and his new apartment, spoke with quiet confidence about the journey. "A year ago, I stood on that stage carrying the weight of a secret I thought would shame me if revealed," he reflected. "Instead, speaking my truth became the key to a door I couldn't even see. That's what I want people to understand. Sometimes what we think will diminish us actually contains the seeds of our restoration." The episode closed with Steve Harvey announcing the establishment of the Thomas Williams Dignity Fund, a national initiative providing emergency housing assistance coupled with employment pathways for individuals with professional skills displaced by economic circumstances. The fund's mission statement, crafted by Thomas himself, embodied the lesson of his journey. Circumstances may change, but dignity remains. Our purpose is to bridge the gap between crisis and opportunity, recognizing the persistent humanity in each person we serve. As the cameras captured Thomas surrounded by his family, colleagues from the Harvey Foundation, and former residents of Lakeside Shelter who had successfully transitioned to independence, viewers witnessed the ripple effects of that singular moment of authenticity. A simple game show answer that had revealed not just a man's identity, but a profound truth about human resilience and the transformative power of being truly seen. Steve Harvey, reflecting on the experience in his memoir published the following year, wrote, "In 15 years of hosting, I've learned that sometimes the most powerful moments happen when we set aside the script and respond with authentic humanity. What began with Thomas Williams has fundamentally changed how I approach not just my work, but my understanding of success, dignity, and the connections that truly matter. Sometimes, refusing to continue with business as usual opens the door to something far more meaningful than we could have planned."